morning of September 20th, 1939. The fresh autumn air in Sopot carries the salty tang of the Baltic Sea mixed with the subtle scent of pines from the seaside resort, but inside the walls of an elegant hotel, the atmosphere weighs heavy like thick cigarette smoke. While low and calculating voices discuss the fate of lives deemed unworthy, the silence broken only by the crackle of official papers, and the oppressive weight of decisions that chill the spine like a cutting northern wind. Doctors and Nazi officials, with tense faces slick with sweat despite the morning chill, lean over plans that turn medical science into a cold and systematic death sentence, evoking the silent terror of a nation devouring its own vulnerable, the icy touch of a stethoscope sealing invisible fates. While Poland agonizes under the dual invasion by Germans and Soviets, the day 20 marks a somber turning point in the Nazi war machine, where racial ideology intertwines with territorial conquest. 19 days after the start of the German Blitzkrieg, Reich forces consolidate territories in western Poland, establishing military administrations that pave the way for brutal occupations. But internally, the regime accelerates its eugenic purification. In Sopot, Hitler, fresh from a triumphant speech in Danzig the day before, where he proclaimed divine blessing on his arms, and veiled threats to the Western Allies with an invincible weapon, gathers his personal physician Karl Brandt. The head of the Chancellery, Philip Buhler, is less than Hazon. 0 is greater than, and the chief of medical officers, Leonardo Conti, to outline the Euthanasia program, later codenamed Aktion T4. The order, backdated to September 1st to coincide with the war's start, delegates absolute authority to them for granting mercy deaths to incurable patients, the mentally disabled, and others deemed feeble or asocial, the air thick with the acrid smell of cigarettes as they discuss painless and efficient methods, lethal injections of phenol, or gas chambers with carbon monoxide, to eliminate these individuals and preserve German blood purity, justifying it as a measure to spare resources for the flower of youth on the front. The ground in Germany trembles not with bombs, but with the ethical weight of asylums being scoured by evaluation committees, the cold touch of stethoscopes and questionnaires sealing fates in institutions like Gurdon, near Brandenburg, where a special pediatric department is created to put newborns to sleep as quickly as possible, avoiding deep maternal bonds, evoking the muffled wail of mothers whose hearts shatter like broken glass upon receiving vague news of transfers or experimental treatments. The antiseptic smell of hospitals masking the subtle odor of planned death. In the central and southern Polish front, the Battle of Tomaszów Lubelski reaches its brutal and decisive climax, with the Polish Kraków and Lublin armies, under General Tadeusz Piskor, facing the German 14th Army led by Wilhelm List in one of the largest clashes of the campaign, is less than Hazon. 0 is greater than, involving tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of guns. After days of fierce fighting starting on September 17th, the Polish troops, exhausted, outnumbered, and outgunned, and isolated by the Soviet invasion in the east, launched disorganized and desperate attacks against fortified German lines, the muddy and soaked ground clinging to boots like clotted blood, while the guttural roar of Panzer I and II tanks echoes like nearby thunder, tearing the air with shells that leave smoking craters, and the metallic taste of defeat and dust in dry mouths of the defenders. Significant losses marked the end of the second largest battle of the invasion, with thousands of Polish soldiers killed or wounded, their bodies fallen in contorted positions across open fields, the acrid smell of burned flesh and gunpowder mixing with churned earth and damp grass, and the uncontrollable tremor of survivors feeling the oppressive weight of surrender like a claw gripping the chest, culminating in the mass capitulation of about 20,000 Poles on day 20, leaving southern Poland exposed to total occupation. To the east, the Soviet forces of the Red Army. Invaders since September 17th, under the pretext of protecting Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities, advance relentlessly toward Grodno and other border cities, capturing territories with little organized resistance due to the Polish collapse in the west, the ground shaking under the weight of T-26 and BT-7 tanks crushing dusty roads and villages, is less than Hajon. 0 is greater than the air loaded with fine dust that irritates the throat and eyes. While the constant hum of Polikarpov planes forces terrified civilians to throw themselves into dew-covered ditches. Soviet soldiers, with rough uniforms chafing sweaty and irritated skin, arrest resisting Poles in swift actions, the dry crack of Mosin Nagant rifles echoing through once peaceful streets, while families feel cold sweat trickle down their necks upon hearing orders shouted in hostile Russian, and the sound of bayonets being fixed. In Lwów, the German siege tightens like a vice, but the imminent Soviet intervention hangs like a cold and uncertain mist, the San River flowing merciless and icy like an omen of territorial divisions that tear the Polish nation like an open and infected wound, with refugees dragging along clogged roads, the sticky touch of dirt and fatigue marking their skin. In Warsaw, the siege closes even tighter, with the relentless bombing by the Luftwaffe dumping explosive loads on the besieged capital, the air vibrating with the deafening roar of Heinkel, He-111, and Junkers Ju-87 bombers, buildings collapsing into suffocating clouds of dust and rubble that irritate the eyes and squeeze the chest like an invisible fist. Civilians, including the vast Jewish community of hundreds of thousands, huddled in damp and dark basements, the sticky touch of cold sweat and fear mixing with the pungent smell of burned wood and melted metal, is less than Hajon. 0 is greater than while sirens wail like collective laments, evoking the paralyzing dread of a city bleeding under the gray and smoky sky, with the ground trembling like a living earthquake with each impact. Even darker, Nazi atrocities escalate in the occupied territory, with the SS Special Task Force Einsatzgruppe of Udo von Warsch continuing summary executions in Polish villages and towns. On day 20, the operational section of the 14th Army reports growing unease among regular Wehrmacht troops. Outraged by the frankly illegal measures taken by the SS against defenseless civilians, Jews, intellectuals, clergy, and supposed looters shot en masse. Many executed, while trying to escape in actions that demonstrate courage only against the unarmed, rather than on the front. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commander of forces in the south, immediately declares that such special forces will not be tolerated in the active war zone, ordering the containment of anti-Jewish actions started in the Katowice region. But the smell of fresh gunpowder and freshly dug earth lingers over improvised mass graves. The cold soil absorbing hot blood, while families hidden in damp and dark attics hear the heavy echo of Nazi boots marching like an inevitable death verdict, the terror chilling bones like an early winter wind. In areas like Cesilovka, though prior massacres occurred, the pattern of violence continues, with German troops leaving trails of inert bodies, is less than Hajon. 0 is greater than the air filled with agonizing moans and the ferrous odor of blood spilled on dew-damp grass, evoking the raw horror of doors being forced open and commands shouted in harsh and merciless German. As the sun sets over blood-soaked fields and ruined cities, the uncertainty of tomorrow hangs heavy like a cold and suffocating mist, a somber reminder that war devours not only bodies, but entire souls, touching every sense in a macabre dance of survival and despair. The collective grief settles like an oppressive cloak, with the distant echo of artillery and engines promising more pain and devastation, while Poland, divided between two invaders and bleeding profusely, clings to the tenuous hope of a world watching in distant silence, its allies delaying an immobilization that seems increasingly illusory. To not miss the next day, subscribe, like, and comment.